I told you I'd be back. Welcome back. Tro, getting used to this podcast thing. So I said I'll be back because we're talking about the 80s today. Who doesn't love the 80s, right? I know I do. That's one of some of the things we're going to talk about on this podcast, especially Gen X related, right? Well, as it turns out, a lot of people love the 80s these days, right? Interesting that is the way it is. You have sort of a nostalgic feeling for the 80s. And it's not just us Gen X folks or even, older people, boomers or whatever that have a kind of nostalgia for those days. It's the younger people too, Gen Z, the millennials. And why is that exactly? So there is a theory out there. It's very interesting. It's called the 1988 anomaly. And that's what we're going to get into today because I kind of think I figured this thing out and we're going to talk about it. But anyway, to start with, what I think of when I think of 1988, of course, is this when the bump began for me. My 1985 Mustang LX, blue mag wheels, white letter tires. It was beautiful. It was an amazing thing. But one of the things I remember very well about 88 was I got a sound system in my car because we like the cars that go boom, right? We did back then anyway. And I have to say, my Alpine 7156 pumping to those 12-inch subwoofers in the back, we really got after it a little bit. I'll say that. It was a lot of fun. But the 80s were great. They were awesome. Anyone who experienced the 80s understands just exactly how, we were very fortunate to be alive and growing up in those days. But what is the 1988 anomaly? Well, we're going to get into that. Now, if you look at today, you do see a lot of people that really love the 80s. Stranger Things is a really good example of that. People are looking at Stranger Things and to give that nostalgia. Also, some of the, really great movies from the 80s are still in the mainstream today, like, The Breakfast Club, which is a great movie. John Hughes was amazing. Now, when I'm thinking John Hughes, I always think of Weird Science and Kelly LeBrock. That's just me. But you do have a lot of nostalgia for the 80s. So, being that as it is, the question is exactly why. Is it just because it was a wonderful time to be alive? Sure. But there are people out there that think a little differently. And we're going to get into that here in just a second. First off, though, I want to kind of get into conspiracy theories and what they are. Because this, while not necessarily a conspiracy theory, this is more of a way out there idea than a conspiracy theory because conspiracy theories can sometimes end up being true, right? Now, teaching history, I know that from, firsthand. I just had this past semester, I had a discussion on MK Ultra, which for a time, if you don't know what MK Ultra is, this was the government and the CIA trying to control people's minds with LSD, which sounds like a conspiracy, and a lot of people thought it was for a while. But as we know now, it kind of turned out to be true. So sometimes that can be the case. You can look at these conspiracies and then they become true. Now, when you're looking at that, a lot of people think, JFK, of course. That is a huge conspiracy theory, wasteland, really, when you get into the JFK assassination. Just two examples, since we're on this topic, that I have is one is called The Umbrella Man. Now, you may have seen the Oliver Stone movie JFK. If you haven't, maybe you've seen pictures from that day in Dallas. And there's a guy standing on the side of the road. It was a beautiful day in Dallas. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, they say. And this guy's standing there with an umbrella the entire time. And a lot of people were trying to figure out what in the world is this guy doing. And of course, it feeds into plenty of, conspiracy theories because he happened to be standing exactly where the shots rang into the vehicle. So, of course, it's got to be nefarious, right? He's got to be up to something. Standing there with this umbrella, he's got to have like a gun in there or some kind of spy 007 kind of stuff, right? I mean, you can't come up with a really good explanation or can you? As it turned out, this thing took on so much, water in this whole conspiracy that people had to investigate it. So Congress actually investigated the Umbrella Man. So what they found out was this was a form of protest. This guy who came forward, they found him, the guy that was standing there that day. They found him, and he was not protesting John F. Kennedy. He was protesting his father, Joseph Kennedy, in supporting Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policies toward Adolf Hitler. Now, if you know anything about that time frame and Neville Chamberlain, he used to carry an umbrella all the time. So there you go. That is the conspiracy that turned out to be nothing. But even in Oliver Stone's movie, you'll see people still think of the Umbrella Man as maybe one of these people that have done something crazy, right? But nothing to it. Now, there's another one out there that's a little bit more in depth, and I really love it. And I'll do this in class a lot of times. Is kind of I'm going to spin a conspiracy theory for you, and then you kind of pick it apart, see what you can do. This one has to do with Frank Sinatra. Now, many of you may have heard this before, but, bear with me a little bit here. So Frank Sinatra, if you've ever seen The Godfather, everybody's seen The Godfather. It's kind of one of those movies that if you love movies, you have to have seen The Godfather at some point. Well, there's a scene in that movie where Marlon Brando, who's playing the Godfather, is sitting there on the day of his daughter's wedding, and in comes in this singer who is crying. And, if you remember, he comes in and he's crying and he grabs it, says, "I'm back like a man," that's that sort of thing. So when he's doing this, it's actually this whole scene is based on reality. No way. But technically it is. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. Frank Sinatra had some issues early on in his career. He was very well known. Then he had an affair. He kind of fell out of grace with the public, and he was kind of on the skids a little bit. Well, there was this movie that was coming out, From Here to Eternity, that he wanted to party in so bad. He really did. And he ended up getting this part, even though rumor has it that he probably shouldn't have, or at least he wasn't initially considered for it. That's what this scene in this movie is about, right? Is that he actually gets this part. If you remember the horse head in the producer's bed out in Hollywood and the whole thing. Now, I don't know if that part was true, but what I do know is that Frank Sinatra did have some relationships with people who were, made guys, so to speak. They were involved in a La Cosa Nostra. That's fun to say. You should try it. But he definitely was involved. Now, one of those was Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino was the head of the Gambino crime family at that time. And he actually The Godfather is loosely based on some of the things that Carlo Gambino did or was supposedly done. And that's where the character comes in. I think his name was Johnny Fontaine or something like that in the movie, but it's based on Frank Sinatra. Now, why do I tell this story? All right, so here's why. So Frank Sinatra, during the 1960 campaign, he ends up supporting JFK. I mean, all in for JFK. Everybody's voting for Jack, that whole thing. He had a song. He was there. He was supporting him. And so the story goes like this, that Frank Sinatra talked to Sam Giancana because Illinois was a battleground state. And Chicago was, of course, an urban center. And you had an area where, you had a lot of votes. So Sam Giancana was the head of the mob in Chicago. So the idea was Sam Giancana could maybe swing some votes toward, JFK. That's the idea. Now, as it turns out, Chicago, Illinois, it was really, really close. In fact, some people believe the fix was in. Maybe there was throwing a little too much toward JFK. Now, whether or not it was or wasn't, I don't know, but it was close. I mean, it was one of the more close elections we've had, and Nixon was the opponent for JFK, if you don't know, and it was really close. Nip and tuck all the way through. But JFK ends up winning. Very close, but he wins. Now, here is what the deal was supposed to be. Now, JFK had undoubtedly either alluded to or told Frank Sinatra, "Oh, don't worry, we won't mess around with the mob. We'll leave them alone," right? And that's what Frank Sinatra told Sam Giancana. Well, as it turns out, Robert F. Kennedy is made. Now, this is Robert F. Kennedy Sr., not Jr., that now we know is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. But this was his father. And he was, of course, JFK's brother, made him Attorney General. And the first thing he does is go after the mob. Like immediately, he goes after them. And literally, it's like, they're like, what's going on here? This is crazy. And then, he does this. He goes after him, even says, we're going after La Cosa Nostra and the whole thing. And it turns into I remember Frank Costello, I think, ends up testifying in front of Congress. It was a wild time. But this, of course, ticks off Sam Giancana because he's like, wait a minute. I helped get this guy elected, right? So, as it turns out, Frank Sinatra's son ends up getting kidnapped around this time. True story. Sam Giancana later in a memoir actually said, I'm the one that did that because I was ticked off at Sinatra. And one thing led to another. And this is why a lot of people think the mob had something to do with killing JFK. Because when you get further into it, what you find out is Jack Ruby, who ends up shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, after Oswald is accused of killing Kennedy, he never really gets to tell his story completely because Ruby kills him. And of course, Ruby had mob ties as well. So there you go. Conspiracies everywhere. All right, enough of that. So the reason that I came to this idea today is that a lot of people love the 80s, right? Just can't get enough of anything to do with the 80s. Now, there's this thing out there, and it's called the 1988 Anomaly. What is it? Well, the 1988 Anomaly, basically, if you've ever had your computer like crash on you, completely go out, right? And then it tries to reset itself and take you back to exactly that point where you were before the crash. This is the idea behind the 1988 Anomaly. So basically, you have all these different events that happen in 1988. You have there's an earthquake. There's the first computer virus that has ever existed happens during this time frame. All these things are going on. You have just famine, drought. All these things are happening at this time frame. And the theory is, and this is, I can't even call it a theory. It's an idea. It's kind of one of those things that we all live in a simulation kind of idea, right? But the thing is that, all right, so 1988, the world resets completely. And we go right back to start fresh. That's the theory. And the reason that some people believe this is because of one little thing called the Mandela effect. Now, if you've ever heard of the Mandela effect, which I'm sure most of you have, this is the idea that you remember things a certain way, right? But it ends up being not that way. And the reason it's called the Mandela effect is because of Nelson Mandela. Many people believed he died in the 80s, right? They thought that he had passed away in the 80s. He didn't. He passed away in 2013, I think, or 14. I think it was 2013. Somewhere in there, he passed away. So the idea is that, we remember things a certain way, and then all of a sudden it's not. One of the more famous things like that, the Mandela effect, is Star Wars. Luke, I am your father, that whole thing. And as it turns out, that's not exactly what he says, Darth Vader says in Star Wars. There are many of these things. Do you remember Shaggy from Scooby-Doo having an Adam's apple? Right? Some people do, and I guess he doesn't. I thought he did, but he doesn't have one. Also, is it Captain, Captain, Crunch, or Cap'n, CAP''N, right? I think it's Cap'n, the CAP''N. Some people remember it differently. Tony the Tiger's Nose, since we're on breakfast cereals, which I love me some breakfast cereal, which we may do a whole podcast on that one day because the 80s, we had the best breakfast cereals that ever existed. So anyway, so the idea is that all these memories, right, that you have, that you think right? You think that you remember things a certain way, but as it turns out, it's not that way. So these people who buy into this 1988 anomaly say this is the mind trying to go back to that like what happened before this huge reset, right? I know it's just sounds like craziness, and to be quite honest, it probably I'm sure it is, but it's fun to think about, right? The cool thing about these ideas is it's kind of like brain candy in a way. You think about what people think, and then you can look at it and kind of pick apart little things and sort of it's fun to talk about, and that's really what we're getting into here because this whole idea of a reset is not anything new. People have thought this for a long time that there's in fact it gets into string theory and the multiple universes, and if you've ever saw a Marvel movie you know what I'm talking about because that whole idea of these different multiverses is like an idea in physics that people believe. Now I don't know. I mean, it just seems so far above my pay grade. I don't even try to talk about that. It's fun. I love me some science, right? Physics, I've never really understood. In fact, ninth grade, I failed Miss Fortenberry's physical science class. Well, no, I didn't. I made a D. I almost failed. In fact, she used to do this thing. Sorry to get off on a tangent here, but it's my podcast. I guess I can do what I want. So she used to do this thing. If you fell asleep in class, she'd pour water on you. Well, I got water poured on me right there in Fultondale High School. I was asleep because, gosh, physical science was horrendous. And if it wasn't for my daddy, I never would have passed because he made my project for me. I can admit that now. I think the statute of limitations is up. But yeah, so I almost failed physical science. Miss Fortenberry, she's passed away. And rest in peace, Miss Fortenberry. I loved her. She was great, but I just wasn't very good at physical science. I remember she used to drive a Corvette and she kept her key around her neck. I'll never forget that. Anyway, beside that, 1988, outstanding year, right? A lot of really cool things happened in 88. I mean, Guns N' Roses came out with Sweet Child of Mine in 88. I mean, how can that not be a great year, right? If there's ever a song that defines the 80s, Sweet Child of Mine has got to be it. But anyway, so this idea that everything reset is not new. Some people believe it happens every 12 years, right? Every 12 years, there's a reset. If you want to get into history, Thomas Jefferson actually believed that every 20 years we should have an ideological revolution, which means that you have a different ideas that come in and kind of change culture, right? Every year there's every generation there's a revolution. So all these things, it's very interesting when you get into this. Now, I have to say, this one's a tough sell. Any way you look at it, it's fun because there is a lot of interest in the 80s today. I mean, look at me doing this podcast. This whole and Gen X is like, I mean, arguably the greatest generation that's ever existed. I mean, so we have there's a lot of great memories, a lot of nostalgia. I mean, Stranger Things, like I mentioned earlier, is amazing the way they bring some of this back up, and it was really a great time. Now, is that because we're all yearning for this lost world that we used to have? Is it because of those things? I would say, and this is just a guess, I would say absolutely not. No, it's not at all. But some people believe these things, and you can find plenty of information out there if you want to look for it, right? It's there. And it's not hard to find if you look. But I will say, I think I figured this whole thing out. And I'm going to tell you the story of what exactly I think happened in 1988 that like warped the timeline. 1988, great year as we mentioned. I just started driving, 16 years old. Great Mustang LX, the bump, man, the blue car, the tinted windows, limo tent, right? Had to have limo tent. A guy named Skeet put it in for me in Tarrant City. Never forget it. Anyway, all right, so I am just, it's just a great year. Now that summer, around this time, actually in June, I believe it was, a bunch of us, and I'm not going to mention any names. I think that many people, if you were there or you've heard this story before, you'll know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to, actually out anybody here on this podcast. But there were a bunch of us that wanted to go out and have a good time. It was Friday, Saturday night in June 1988. Beautiful time, long hair. It was amazing. It was, I had the mullet rocking, and all that good stuff. So it was really cool. So we went up to Burger King parking lot in Gardendale because we didn't have any money, right? At that particular time, I had started working. Well, I was working for the city in the summer, but I don't think that I'd got my first check yet. So we didn't have any money. So we went up to Burger King parking lot and we bummed money for hours to get enough money. I shouldn't admit this, but again, the statute of limitations is up to go buy some Milwaukee's Best Light, what we refer to as the Beast. And we bummed money in Burger King parking lot all night long, got enough. We went and got us some, I don't know, as much beer as we could buy. And we ended up going out in the woods, way out in the woods, we thought. As it turned out, it was back in a neighborhood called Timber Trail, right behind somebody's house. I won't mention her name, but she may know because it was right back behind her house. There was a cabin, but it wasn't that far from the road is my whole point here. So we went back in there. And we thought we were going to have us a good old night. We built this huge bonfire. Everything was going to be wonderful. And it was going to be just a great time. One of my buddies got on a rope swing and was swinging back and forth. And then the next thing you know, the police come. Now, normally back in the day when the police showed up, you ran, but we didn't have nowhere to go. So we thought about it for a second because normally if you're in a house party or, you're something like that and the police come, you hit the back door, right? As soon as you can. Now, we couldn't do that. Because we were in the woods. We were in the middle of the woods. We couldn't go anywhere. So here come the police. And they're like, what are y'all doing out here? And we're like, well, how did you know? Well, as it turns out, it was a drought. I mentioned that earlier. There was actually a drought in 1988, right? So I just hit on something. There was a drought, and we had built this huge bonfire in the middle of the woods. There was a no burn ordinance. And of course, somebody called or somebody saw the smoke and said, you should go check this out. Anyway, so the next thing you know, we're being led out of the woods by the police, 2 police cars to go to jail, right? Here we go. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, man. I mean, I'm just turning 16. I hadn't been 16 long, few months. Here I am out in the woods, breaking the law. Of course, we have alcohol, so of course we're breaking the law. So here we go, and then one of my buddies was in the back seat with me. He said, "Oh man, that's such and such Poli. He got me last time, and this, that, the other." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what am I getting into?" So we ended up down at the old Fultondale City Jail, City Hall. It burned down years ago. Anyway, so the thing is that we were sitting there and they decided these are kids, we're not going to do anything. So we're going to call their parents. And here is where it gets interesting because they had to call Frank Perry to come pick me up. Oh gosh. Let me tell you something. I would have rather stayed in jail. I would have rather worked as a trustee in their jail for as long as they wanted me than to have Frank Perry come pick me up at the city jail. Because, this man, when he used to call me, I used to think about stuff I did. Like, hey, boy. And I think, oh, gosh, what did I do? Because I knew. I used to think my name was Damn It Boy. I swear. I mean, there's so many stories I could tell. I love my daddy. He's no longer with us. He was an amazing man. But he was no business. I mean, he was, no, you didn't mess around with Frank Perry. So he came down to pick me up from jail. Oh, gosh, I would have rather stayed. As he walked in, as he rounded the door, it was like I lost my soul, left my body. He walked in the door of Old City Hall, and he came in the door, and the police were saying, hey, Frank, and this, and they were going to tell him, and then all of a sudden, it's like his whole face just changed, and he turned it, and he just lit into me, and the cop shut up. They didn't say anything. At that particular point in time, when Frank Perry had a hold of my butt that day in Fultondale City Hall, I think there was a warp in the timeline. Honestly, I do. I think that was the day that everything changed, and this whole 1988 anomaly began at that moment. Because it's like, it was like my life was different after that. It was like, all right, so the whole thing, Frank comes and gets me at the jail. The timeline just completely just warps. So there you go. I think that I have explained the 1988 anomaly in the best way that I possibly can. So that is, that's it in a nutshell. I would encourage you though, if you enjoy these kind of things, look them up because they're a lot of fun. Honestly, personally, I am not. I don't want to say I'm a fan of conspiracy theories because some of them are out there. But they're fun to look at and kind of either disprove or find some truth to, because you never know. If you look at them, you can find some, truth, little veins of truth in there, here and there. They can be a lot of fun to look at, and that's a little history advice because everything, if you just look at it a little bit more and use that critical thinking, you can come to a pretty good conclusion about a lot of things. That's the important thing. I think that hopefully this generation is not losing its critical thinking because it's really important to have. Anyway, that is the 1988 anomaly. And sort of, I left a lot out because personally, I don't think it's a real thing unless you count, the Frank Perry effect. Maybe it could be. But that is it for this edition of Retro Recon, which at this particular point I am using as a working title because this is early on in this whole podcasting experience. I'm using it as a working title. I may change that. I may, I may call myself the budget historian, like the was it Graham Kerr used to be the budget gourmet, something like that. Because I'm doing it all on a budget. My overhead of this thing is pretty low. I bought a mic. That's about all I've done. But anyway, it's a lot of fun, and thank you for tuning in. Keep listening. There's more to come. And if you have any ideas of topics to cover or something you want to discuss, or if you want to be a guest on the podcast, we can do that too. So have a fantastic day. God bless America.